Cowboy fights corrupt town to save mother, and daughter the sun rose slowly over the quiet town of Redridge, casting golden light over dusty streets and wooden buildings. In the outskirts of the town, where the fields stretched wide and the wind whispered through the tall grass, lived a man known by everyone simply as the Cowboy. He was not famous for riches or grand adventures, but for something far more important: his courage and his honesty. His face was weathered by years in the sun, and his eyes held the quiet determination of someone who had seen hardship but never given up. The Cowboy lived in a small wooden house on the edge of the town. It was modest, with a porch that creaked when he walked on it and a small garden where he grew vegetables and herbs. Though the house was simple, it was full of life because of the laughter of his young daughter, Emily, and the comforting presence of his mother, Martha. Emily was a bright and curious girl, with wide eyes that reflected her father's determination and her grandmother's warmth. Martha, though older, moved with grace and a quiet strength that had carried the family through many difficult years. Together they formed a close-knit trio, bound by love and mutual care. Every morning the Cowboy followed a routine that balanced responsibility with moments of quiet reflection. He would rise before the sun, saddle his horse, and ride to the outskirts of the fields. Here he tended to the land, repairing fences, checking on the livestock, and ensuring that the property remained safe. Though he lived a life of solitude in many ways, he never felt lonely. The bond with his daughter and mother was enough to fill his heart, and the routine gave him purpose. Redridge, from a distance, seemed peaceful. Children played in the streets, shopkeepers opened their stores with cheerful greetings, and travelers passing through were welcomed with polite smiles. But behind the friendly faces and the polite nods, the town was controlled by a shadow that few dared to speak of. The mayor, a man with a sharp tongue and a colder heart, ran the town with an iron grip. He had a small group of men who answered only to him, enforcing his rules and punishing those who stepped out of line. The townspeople had grown accustomed to the fear that hung over their daily lives, and even small acts of defiance were met with threats or worse. The Cowboy, despite living on the outskirts, could feel the tension whenever he ventured into town. He had witnessed the mayor's men forcing small business owners to pay unfair taxes and heard whispers of families being intimidated into giving up their property. Though he preferred to live quietly, he could not ignore injustice entirely. It troubled him deeply, especially when he thought of his daughter growing up in a town where courage was punished and fear ruled. One morning, as he prepared to take Emily to the small schoolhouse on the edge of town, he noticed a group of men gathered near the general store. They were strangers, or perhaps men he had seen before but never spoken to. Their presence immediately made him uneasy. They laughed loudly and threw crude gestures toward the shopkeeper, who looked frightened and unwilling to respond. The Cowboy felt a tightening in his chest. He wanted to confront them, but he also knew that rash action could escalate into violence that might endanger others. Instead, he chose to observe quietly, keeping a distance as he watched the men disperse after a while. It was a small incident, yet it stayed with him all day. Over lunch, he discussed it with Martha, who listened carefully, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Redridge has always had shadows," she said softly, "but courage, when guided by love, can shine brighter than fear. Remember that, son?" Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience and wisdom. Emily, sensing the tension between her father and grandmother, tried to lighten the mood. She spoke of her lessons at school, the games she played with her friends, and the stories she had read. Her laughter was bright and innocent, a reminder of why the Cowboy fought so hard to maintain peace in his own world. Every smile from Emily reminded him that despite the shadows lurking in Redridge, there was still hope, and it was his duty to protect it. As the days passed, the Cowboy continued his work while keeping a careful watch on the town. He would often ride into the market, exchanging polite words with neighbors and checking in on the general mood. He noticed more subtle signs of the mayor's influence: small businesses closing, townspeople avoiding certain streets, and whispered warnings carried from door to door. Though the town appeared calm on the surface, tension simmered underneath. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the town, the Cowboy sat on his porch with Emily nestled beside him. He strummed a small guitar, a rare moment of relaxation in his otherwise busy life. Emily listened, her head resting against his shoulder, and asked about the world beyond Redridge. He spoke to her gently, describing distant places, heroic deeds, and the importance of kindness and courage. He wanted her to grow up understanding that strength was not just in fists or guns, but in the heart and the mind. Martha joined them, carrying a warm cup of tea for each of them. She spoke of the past, of struggles she had faced and overcome, instilling a sense of resilience in both her son and granddaughter. The three of them sat together in the quiet evening, sharing stories, laughter, and dreams. In those moments, the world outside seemed distant and irrelevant, and for a little while, the cowboy allowed himself to believe that peace could last. But life in Redridge was never simple. Even as the cowboy tried to maintain his calm routine, he could feel the currents of trouble growing stronger. Strange occurrences began to surface. A missing child from a neighboring farm, a sudden increase in aggressive behavior from the mayor's men, and rumors of secret meetings held late at night. These incidents were not connected yet, but the cowboy sensed that they were threads of a larger, darker web. Despite the unease, he refused to let fear dominate his actions. He continued to rise with the sun, tending to his home and family, teaching Emily the skills she would need to navigate life, and listening to Martha's wisdom. He also began preparing himself quietly, sharpening tools, reviewing old strategies, and observing patterns in the town that others overlooked. He understood that courage required not only bravery but preparation and foresight. The town continued its rhythm, unaware of the storm quietly approaching. Merchants went about their business, children laughed in the streets, and travelers passed through with little concern for the tension hiding beneath polite smiles. But the cowboy remained vigilant. Every creak of a floorboard, every whispered conversation, and every shadow falling across the street became a part of his awareness. He could not afford complacency, not with his family's safety at stake. As days turned into weeks, the cowboy also found small moments of hope and connection within the town. A few neighbors, inspired by his quiet strength and fairness, began to share information, subtle warnings, and stories of resistance. These small alliances, though fragile, reassured him that he was not entirely alone. Even in a town dominated by fear, there were those willing to quietly stand for what was right. One particularly clear morning, the cowboy noticed a stranger lingering near the town square. There was something about the way the man watched the people that made him uneasy. He paid close attention, observing without confronting, and slowly pieced together the stranger's intentions. This was the moment the cowboy realized that the danger was no longer distant. It was approaching his family directly. The sense of urgency that had been growing quietly now became unmistakable. That evening, as he returned home, he spoke to Martha and Emily about the importance of vigilance. Though he did not want to frighten his young daughter, he prepared her for understanding the difference between right and wrong, courage and fear. Martha, as always, offered reassurance, reminding him that love and unity could protect them in ways that fear never could. As the sun set behind the hills, casting a warm glow over the fields and the small wooden house, the cowboy sat on his porch once more. He looked at Emily, sleeping peacefully in her grandmother's arms, and felt the full weight of responsibility. The shadows of Redridge might be growing stronger, but he was ready to face them. He was ready to fight not for glory or recognition, but for the family he loved more than anything. In the quiet of the evening, with the wind rustling softly through the tall grass, the cowboy made a silent promise. No matter what storms approached, no matter the dangers lurking in the town, he would protect his mother and daughter with all his strength. And with that resolve, he knew that the calm before the storm was just the beginning of a journey that would test his courage, his heart, and the bonds of family that he cherished above all else. The stars began to shine over Redridge, tiny points of light in a vast sky. In the peaceful glow, the cowboy's heart held hope. Hope that courage and love, even in the face of fear and corruption, could light the darkest paths. And as the night embraced the town, he quietly prepared himself for the challenges to come, knowing that the true fight for justice and protection was only just beginning. The days following the cowboy's quiet vigil were heavy with tension. The town of Redridge appeared normal on the surface, but shadows moved in corners where the sun did not reach. Strange things began to happen, small, unsettling signs that something dangerous was brewing. The cowboy noticed it first while making his way into town to deliver supplies. A shopkeeper gave him a look of fear that lingered too long, and a group of men whispered as he passed by, glancing over their shoulders. He sensed that the threat was no longer just in the distance, it was moving closer. At home, the cowboy tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. Emily's laughter still filled the wooden house in the mornings, and Martha prepared meals with her usual care. Yet there was a quiet tension beneath the surface. The cowboy often found himself scanning the horizon, watching for anyone unusual or suspicious, and listening carefully to sounds that seemed out of place. He wanted to shield his family from worry, but the instinct to prepare for danger never left him. One afternoon, while Emily was playing near the edge of the property, a rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast across the field. The cowboy recognized the posture of the horseman immediately. It was no ordinary traveler. As the figure approached, the cowboy dismounted quickly, his hand hovering near his belt, prepared for confrontation. The rider arrived at the edge of the property and, without dismounting, delivered a message. It was written in crude letters on a scrap of paper and left at the gate. The message was clear: "Stay out of Ridge or you will pay the price." There was no signature, but the intent was unmistakable. The cowboy's heart tightened. He had anticipated threats before, but now they were personal. Someone wanted him to leave his home, to abandon his family, or worse. He tore the note slowly, studying it, feeling the weight of its meaning. Whoever had sent it was confident, bold, and cruel. The town's corruption, which had seemed distant before, was now knocking at his door. The cowboy knew that staying idle was no longer an option. He needed to act, but carefully. A single wrong move could put his mother and Emily in serious danger. That evening, the tension in the house was palpable. Martha noticed his unease immediately. She poured tea into 3 cups and placed them on the small wooden table. "Something has changed," she said quietly, her voice steady but firm. "The wind carries more than whispers now." "You can feel it." The cowboy nodded, knowing she was right. He could not allow fear to dictate their lives, but he also could not underestimate the danger. Emily, sensing her father's worry, asked questions in her innocent, persistent way. "Papa, why do you look so serious?" she said, tugging gently at his sleeve. The cowboy knelt down to her level and smiled softly. "Sometimes, Emily, the world has challenges we must face," he explained. "But no matter what, I will protect you and Grandma." Always, her small hand held his, and for a moment the weight of worry seemed lighter. Over the next few days, the cowboy began to investigate quietly. He rode into town under the guise of daily errands, speaking carefully with neighbors and shopkeepers. Most were too fearful to speak openly, but he gathered fragments of information: stray comments about strangers in town, sightings of unfamiliar men lingering near certain streets, and the growing presence of the mayor's men in areas they had avoided before. The picture that formed in his mind was clear. Someone was planning something serious, and the target was now him and his family. One night, as the cowboy sat on the porch watching the stars, he heard distant noises, voices carried by the wind, the faint clatter of hooves on the dirt road. He stood quickly, straining his ears, but saw nothing immediate. Still, the instinct in his gut told him that danger was approaching, and it was not far away. He began making preparations quietly, securing doors, reinforcing windows, and reviewing old strategies he had learned in younger days when he had dealt with trouble far from home. The threat grew bolder. A few days later, the cowboy returned home from the market to find his property marked. Strange symbols had been etched into the fence posts, and small piles of stones were left near the doors. To anyone else, these might have seemed like meaningless signs, but the cowboy recognized them immediately. These were warnings, a code meant to intimidate him and signal that someone had been on his property. His pulse quickened, but he refused to let fear take over. He knew that panic could only make things worse. As the tension mounted, the mayor's presence became more pronounced in town. He walked the streets with a sense of power, flanked by his men, observing, judging, and subtly intimidating anyone who dared look at him too long. The townspeople moved quickly out of his way, avoiding eye contact, as if they were prisoners of invisible chains. The cowboy, though not fearful of confrontation himself, understood the dangerous influence the mayor had over the people. He could not rely on them for help, not yet. Then came the day when the real danger struck. Emily had been playing outside while the cowboy tended to a small repair on the fence. Suddenly, a group of men appeared, moving quickly across the field. They grabbed Emily before she could scream, their hands rough, their intentions clear. The cowboy reacted immediately, drawing on every ounce of his strength and skill. He fought fiercely, but there were too many. They overpowered him, and in the chaos, his mother was taken from the house as well. Panic and rage surged through the cowboy, but he forced himself to think clearly. He could not let anger cloud his judgment. He knew that reacting impulsively could endanger Emily and Martha. Instead, he observed carefully as the men rode off, noting the direction they took and the composition of the group. Each detail mattered: how many men, the speed of the horses, their positions. He committed everything to memory, preparing himself for the next steps he would have to take. Once the men had disappeared from sight, the cowboy returned to his home, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. The house felt emptier than ever. Emily's laughter was gone, replaced by silence. His mother's gentle voice no longer offered comforting words. The cowboy's heart ached, but he refused to give up. He knew the mayor and his men had made a critical mistake. They underestimated the resolve of someone who would fight for his family without hesitation. He rode into town the next day, not to confront the mayor immediately, but to gather information. Moving quietly through the streets, he spoke to those who would talk in whispers, noting patterns and listening carefully to rumors. He learned that the mayor had been taking hostages, not just for intimidation, but to expand control over the town. Each fragment of information brought clarity, allowing the cowboy to form a plan. At home, he began preparing strategically. He sharpened tools, checked weapons, and mapped the town and surrounding lands in his mind. He trained quietly, running through scenarios of rescue and confrontation. He also made contingency plans, thinking through every possible outcome, because he knew that any mistake could cost the lives of Emily or Martha. As night fell, the cowboy often sat alone under the stars, reflecting on the life he wanted for his daughter and mother. He remembered the lessons Martha had taught him: strength through love, courage through compassion, and resilience through unity. These memories became his guide. He reminded himself that fear could not control him and that his love for his family would drive him to overcome any obstacle. During this time, small acts of kindness from the town's citizens began to surface. A baker left bread at the edge of his property with a note of encouragement, and a few neighbors whispered warnings about patrols of the mayor's men. These small gestures reminded the cowboy that even in a town gripped by corruption and fear, pockets of courage and goodness still existed. They would become valuable allies in the fight to come. The days turned into a tense waiting game. Each morning, he checked the horizon for signs of Emily or his mother. Each evening, he listened for noises that might indicate movement nearby. The stress weighed heavily, but he never allowed despair to take hold. Instead, he focused on preparation, observation, and planning. He knew that the coming confrontation would test him in ways he could not yet imagine, but he also knew he could not fail. Finally, the cowboy began to piece together the plan of those who had taken his family. Their movements suggested that they intended to move his mother and daughter to a remote location outside the town, where they would be harder to find and more vulnerable. With this knowledge, he refined his own strategy. He would not rush blindly into danger. Instead, he would use his understanding of the land, his skill with horses, and his knowledge of the town to outmaneuver them. The tension reached a climax one evening when he saw a familiar figure from the group watching the outskirts of his property. The cowboy mounted his horse quietly, moving closer to observe without being noticed. He studied the movements carefully, noting patterns, timing, and routes. Every detail mattered. This was no longer a distant threat. It was a direct challenge, and he would meet it with courage, intelligence, and unyielding determination. By the end of this period, the cowboy had transformed his home and mind into a fortress of readiness. Every tool, every strategy, and every ally was in place. The danger had escalated from rumors to direct action, but he remained calm and focused. His love for Emily and Martha was now the fuel for every thought, every plan, and every breath. He knew the fight for his family's safety was only beginning, and he would face it with the courage and resolve that had always defined him. The cowboy rode silently through the hills surrounding Ridge, his horse's hooves barely making a sound on the dry dirt paths. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows across the fields, and the air was crisp with morning chill. Every muscle in his body was alert. Every sense was sharpened to its fullest. He carried no heavy armor or army, only his courage, his experience, and the determination that Emily and his mother's safety depended on him. He had spent days studying the patterns of the men who had taken his family. Their routes, their timings, and even their pauses in movement were now etched into his mind. He knew where they would stop for rest, where they might hide in the night, and which areas of the countryside were least guarded. Every detail mattered because the odds were not in his favor. He was alone, facing a group of men who had already shown they would do anything to maintain control and intimidate those who opposed them. As he rode, memories of his family fueled his resolve. He thought of Emily's laughter, her wide, curious eyes, and her gentle, trusting nature. He remembered how Martha had always been the calm center of the household, her words of wisdom softening the hardest days. Their safety was not just a matter of duty, it was the very heart of his life. The thought of losing them was unbearable, and it strengthened his focus. He reached the first landmark he had memorized, a narrow canyon where the kidnappers were known to stop briefly during their travels. He dismounted quietly and tied his horse to a tree, moving on foot through the rocks and brush. He paused often, listening to the wind and the faint sounds of movement in the distance. Each step was measured, silent, and purposeful. He had no desire for unnecessary confrontation. Every action had to bring him closer to rescuing his family safely. Hours passed as he tracked the kidnappers. He moved carefully through streams, over hills, and into wooded areas, avoiding open spaces that could expose him. He observed their movements from a distance, noting the positions of each man. He recognized their routines. One always walked ahead as a scout, two remained near the captives, and the rest carried supplies. The cowboy studied their behavior and planned his approach meticulously, knowing that surprise, timing, and strategy were his only advantages. As evening approached, he found a vantage point on a ridge overlooking a small abandoned farmhouse. From here, he could see the captives. Emily and Martha were sitting quietly, bound but unharmed. Fear had been written on their faces, but their eyes held hope, and that hope was anchored in the cowboy. Seeing them, his heart clenched with a mix of relief and urgency. He had to act carefully. Any wrong move could trigger panic or provoke violence. The cowboy took a deep breath, calming his mind, and began formulating his plan. He would need to separate the kidnappers, disarm them, and free his family in the shortest possible time. He considered every possibility: if one man saw him too early, if a shot were fired, if his family panicked. Every outcome had to be accounted for. With each passing minute, the tension increased, but so did his determination. Night fell and the moon cast silver light over the farmhouse. The cowboy moved closer, using the darkness to hide his approach. He carefully set traps and distractions, throwing small rocks to create noises away from his position. The kidnappers, trained to be vigilant but not expecting such clever tactics, reacted with confusion. One guard moved to investigate the sound, while the others remained focused on their captives. The cowboy used this distraction to position himself advantageously. He approached the building silently and peered inside. Emily's eyes widened when she saw him in the shadows, but he signaled for her to remain calm. Martha, sensing her son's presence, whispered quietly to Emily to stay composed. The cowboy's mind raced with the final steps of his plan: neutralize the guards, free his family, and escape without alerting reinforcements. Every second mattered. With precise timing, he struck. Using ropes and his own strength, he overpowered the first guard before he could call for help. The second guard, alerted by the struggle, was met with quick, controlled movements that left him immobilized without causing serious harm. The remaining men were confused by the sudden attack and the clever use of shadows and terrain. The cowboy moved swiftly, using both skill and knowledge of the land to stay one step ahead. Emily and Martha watched in awe as the cowboy freed them from their restraints. Their hearts raced, and for a moment the danger seemed almost too close. But the cowboy's calm confidence reassured them. He held Emily's hand firmly and guided Martha to safety, whispering instructions to move quietly, keep low, and follow him exactly. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate, because escape depended on precision and speed. They moved through the night, avoiding open paths and using the terrain to their advantage. The kidnappers, though now aware of their captives' escape, were disoriented by the cowboy's clever maneuvers. He led his family through hidden trails, over streams, and around hills, using his knowledge of the countryside to avoid detection. The air was tense with danger, but hope was stronger, carried by the cowboys' unwavering determination. At one point, the kidnappers regrouped and attempted to cut off their path. The cowboy anticipated this and used a narrow canyon to funnel them, limiting their numbers and neutralizing their advantage. A few quick skirmishes occurred, but the cowboy's skill and preparation allowed him to overcome them without serious injury to his family or himself. Every move was calculated to protect Emily and Martha first, while ensuring that the kidnappers were delayed and confused. After hours of careful maneuvering, they reached a safer area on the outskirts of the forest. The cowboy paused, letting Emily and Martha catch their breath. Their relief was immense, but he knew the journey was not yet over. The town still held dangers, and they could not risk returning home until it was safe. He scouted ahead, ensuring that no pursuers were nearby, and used the cover of darkness to navigate toward a hidden path he had discovered days earlier. Throughout the journey, the cowboy spoke softly to his daughter and mother, offering reassurance and hope. He reminded Emily to stay quiet but brave, and told Martha that help was coming, that the townspeople might yet find the courage to rise. His words were not just comforting, they were strategic, keeping spirits high while maintaining focus. By dawn, they had reached a small, abandoned cabin on a hill, far enough from the town to be safe for the moment. The cowboy secured the perimeter, built small barriers, and made sure that Emily and Martha were safe inside. He provided food, water, and warmth, allowing them to rest while he planned the next steps. Despite the exhaustion in his muscles and mind, the cowboy's determination never wavered. The mission was far from over, but the immediate danger had been averted. From the cabin, the cowboy began to think about the larger battle. The mayor and his men were still a threat, and Redridge was filled with fear and corruption that could easily resurface. But he also knew that this was his moment to act, not just for his family, but for the town itself. The courage and skill he had demonstrated in rescuing his mother and daughter could inspire others to stand up, to reclaim their own strength, and to confront the injustices that had held them captive for so long. He spent the day observing, planning, and preparing. He studied the routes back into town, considering how to expose the mayor's corruption and rally the townspeople safely. He thought carefully about timing, about how to avoid unnecessary violence, and about how to protect those who had quietly shown their courage. Every detail mattered. By evening, the cowboy had crafted a plan. He would not attack blindly. He would gather evidence, gain allies, and use the strength of his family and the truth on his side. The mayor's control over Redridge was built on fear, but fear could be challenged by courage and strategy. The cowboy knew that the coming confrontation would test him, not just physically but morally, emotionally, and mentally. Yet he also knew that he could not fail. Night fell once again, and Emily and Martha rested safely in the cabin. The cowboy stayed awake, keeping watch over the surrounding area. He reflected on the journey so far, the threats, the fears, and the courage that had carried them through. Each challenge had tested him, but each step had also strengthened his resolve. The bond with his daughter and mother had never been clearer, nor had the importance of standing for what was right. As he gazed at the moonlit landscape, the cowboy made a silent vow. He would confront the corruption in Redridge, expose the mayor, and ensure that the town could once again be a safe place for families like his own. The rescue had been a success, but the fight for justice and peace was only beginning. With a heart full of determination, he prepared for the next stage of his mission, knowing that courage, intelligence, and unwavering love would guide him through whatever lay ahead. The cowboy awoke before dawn, the cold morning air sharp against his face. The night had been quiet, almost too quiet, and he knew that the town of Redridge still held danger. Yet there was a new determination in his heart. He had rescued his mother and daughter from immediate harm, but the corruption that had caused their suffering remained. The mayor, the men who had kidnapped his family, and the shadow of fear that hung over the town could not be ignored. The cowboy understood clearly that this was his final challenge, the moment where courage, skill, and wisdom would decide the fate of not only his family, but the entire town. He packed lightly, carrying only essentials, a few supplies, a rope, and the few tools that had already served him well. Emily stirred beside him, her eyes wide but bright. She had begun to understand the courage of her father and the seriousness of the situation, though she trusted him completely. Martha offered a small smile, a mix of pride and concern, knowing that the journey ahead would test every ounce of strength the cowboy possessed. Their plan was simple in principle, but required careful execution. The cowboy would confront the mayor and his men, expose their corruption, and rally the townspeople to reclaim their town. He knew he could not do it through force alone. He needed strategy, surprise, and the element of truth to turn fear into courage. Every step, every movement, every word would be deliberate. Failure was not an option. As they approached the outskirts of the town, the cowboy observed carefully. The streets were quieter than usual, the townspeople wary of the mayor's patrols. The mayor himself appeared in the square, flanked by his men, his expression smug and confident. He did not yet know that the cowboy had returned, or that he carried the courage and strategy to challenge him. The cowboy waited, concealed by shadows, as he studied the positions of the guards, the entrances and exits, and the layout of the square. Knowledge would be his weapon, more powerful than any gun. He began his plan with small, precise actions. Rocks were thrown in the opposite direction to create distractions, causing the guards to investigate sounds away from the main square. A few subtle signals from hidden allies in the town, neighbors who had quietly resisted the mayor, helped to sow confusion. The mayor's men, already uneasy, were unsettled by the sudden disturbances. The cowboy used the moment to move closer, advancing with caution, every step bringing him nearer to the heart of the town and the confrontation he knew was inevitable. In the main square, he confronted the mayor directly. His voice was calm but firm, carrying authority without aggression. "Your time of ruling through fear is over," the cowboy said. The mayor laughed, dismissive at first, confident in the power he had built over the town. "And who will stop me?" "You alone?" he mocked, glancing at the few guards still present. The cowboy did not answer with anger. Instead, he revealed evidence he had gathered, documents, notes, and testimony from the townspeople who had been too frightened to speak before. The proof of the mayor's corruption, the kidnapping, and the illegal dealings was undeniable. Gasps spread through the crowd as the townspeople began to realize the depth of deception they had lived under. The mayor's confidence faltered, replaced by uncertainty as the weight of truth pressed down upon him. Seeing the mayor's hesitation, the cowboy seized the moment. He moved swiftly to disarm the remaining guards, using precise skill and knowledge of the terrain to his advantage. Confused and outmaneuvered, the mayor's men were forced to retreat or surrender. The townspeople, inspired by the courage and intelligence displayed by the cowboy, began to step forward. Their fear slowly gave way to determination. They surrounded the square, supporting the cowboy without needing to fight, using the power of collective courage to reclaim control from the corrupt leadership. Emily and Martha, watching from a safe distance, felt a wave of relief and pride. Emily's eyes sparkled as she saw her father's bravery in action, and Martha's heart swelled with admiration for the strength of her son. The cowboy's actions were more than just physical courage. They demonstrated leadership, wisdom, and the power of standing firmly for what was right. The townspeople's response showed that courage could spread, even in a place where fear had long reigned. The mayor, realizing that his grip on the town had crumbled, tried to escape, but the cowboy anticipated this. He blocked the only viable exit, ensuring that the mayor could not flee. Cornered, the mayor's arrogance turned to desperation. The townspeople, now emboldened, demanded justice. The cowboy spoke calmly but decisively, ensuring that the response remained measured and fair. The mayor and his men were taken into custody, their power dismantled by truth and courage rather than vengeance. With the mayor's defeat, the town slowly began to breathe again. Shops reopened, children played in the streets, and neighbors exchanged greetings without fear. The shadow that had long hung over Redridge lifted, replaced by hope and a renewed sense of community. The cowboy, though exhausted, felt a deep satisfaction. The fight had been difficult, the stakes high, but justice had been restored. He turned to his mother and daughter, who had waited patiently throughout the ordeal. Martha embraced him tightly, her voice trembling with relief. "You have done more than save us," she said softly. "You have reminded this town of courage, love, and what is right." Emily ran into his arms, her small hands clutching his jacket. "Papa, you were so brave," she said, her voice full of awe and admiration. The cowboy smiled, holding them both close, feeling the warmth of family and the reward of his struggle. In the days that followed, the cowboy helped the townspeople rebuild their sense of safety and community. He worked alongside them to repair damage, restore order, and encourage cooperation. Though he did not seek recognition, the gratitude of the town was evident in small gestures, friendly smiles, offers of help, and quiet words of thanks. The cowboy had not only protected his family, but also inspired the town to reclaim its integrity. Even with peace restored, the cowboy remained vigilant. He knew that corruption and fear could return if left unchecked. He continued to train, to observe, and to ensure that his family and the town remained safe. Yet he also allowed himself moments of rest, enjoying the laughter of Emily and the gentle guidance of Martha. The quiet evenings on the porch, the simple meals shared together, and the peaceful rides through the fields became reminders of why he had fought so hard. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the cowboy rode through the town with Emily perched behind him on the horse and Martha walking beside them. The streets were calm, the townspeople going about their lives with renewed confidence. The cowboy felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The struggle had tested every part of him, his courage, his intelligence, and his heart. But he had emerged not just victorious, but stronger and more connected to his family and community than ever before. He paused at the edge of town, looking back at the streets that had once been filled with fear. The memory of danger was still fresh, but so was the triumph. He knew that the journey had been about more than defeating a corrupt mayor. It had been about standing up for justice, protecting those he loved, and inspiring others to find courage within themselves. The town of Redridge would remember this lesson, and so would he. As night fell, the cowboy, Emily, and Martha returned to their home on the outskirts of town. The small wooden house, which had once seemed vulnerable to the threats of the world, now felt like a fortress of love and resilience. Emily ran to the porch, laughing and pointing to the stars above. Martha prepared a simple meal, her hands steady and confident. The cowboy sat quietly, watching his family, feeling the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing that he had fought for what truly mattered and had won. The story of the cowboy's courage spread quietly through Redridge. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about the man who had risked everything to save his family and confront corruption. His bravery became a quiet inspiration, a reminder that even in the darkest times, one person's courage could spark change and restore hope. The town had been tested, but it had survived, stronger and wiser than before. In the months that followed, life returned to a peaceful rhythm. The cowboy continued his daily routines, tending to the land, teaching Emily valuable skills and spending time with Martha. Yet there was a difference now, a sense of confidence and trust in the world around him. He knew that danger might return someday, but he also knew that he and his family were capable of facing it. The lessons learned, the courage displayed, and the unity of family would guide them through any challenge that might come. And so, the cowboy, who had once simply lived on the outskirts of a troubled town, became more than just a figure of quiet strength. He became a symbol of courage, justice, and love. Emily grew up knowing that bravery was not just about fighting with fists or weapons, but about standing firmly for what is right, protecting those you love, and inspiring others to find courage within themselves. Martha, proud and relieved, continued to guide the family with wisdom and care, grateful for the safety and hope that had been restored. The final image of the cowboy was simple but powerful. He rode through the hills with Emily behind him, Martha walking alongside, and the sun setting behind them in a brilliant glow. Dust swirled gently around the horses' hooves, and the wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the sense of peace and renewal. Redridge was no longer a town of fear. It was a town of hope, courage, and restored justice. And at the heart of it all stood the cowboy, the man who had fought not for glory, but for family, truth, and the simple yet profound power of standing up for what is right.